Anyway, you heard him say that. Now I want you to tell you a little bit of an inside story about the Bushes and Jeb Bush. They're very close to a man named James A. Baker III. James A. Baker III ran Gerald Ford's campaign, and they lost against Carter. Then he ran George H.W. Bush's effort in 1979 and 80 to defeat Ronald Reagan. They lost. And then he was brought into the Reagan administration. At one point he was chief of staff. At one point he was secretary of the Treasury. At one point he was secretary of state. But he spent most of his time undermining the conservative wing of the Republican Party and the Reaganites. Could he make the train run on time? You bet he could. But he brought in a number of people like Darman and others who were certainly not Reaganites and certainly not conservative, to block a lot of us, to stop a lot of us. Then, of course, when George W. Bush was elected, he was the guy they turned to help them with the litigation with respect to Al Gore, and that was a good thing. But Jim Baker, much like Barack Obama, has always had a hate-on for Israel. That State Department has always had a hate-on for Israel. They've got like 23 Arab desks and then the Jewish desk. Something like that. But there's this real contempt. And there's a piece you really should read at Breitbart.com by our buddy Joel Pollack, who we had on yesterday. Because this Jeb Bush, who you just heard, reaching out to minorities and going on, Jeb Bush has brought James Baker into his campaign as his top foreign policy advisor. And Pollack points out that former Secretary of State James Baker III is going to deliver the keynote speech at this weekend's J Street Conference. I'm going to explain what that is in a moment. A gathering of left-wing activists opposed to the Israeli government and to recently elected Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. In my opinion, these are the self-hating Jews, among others. So, of course, they have an affinity for Baker, and he has an affinity for them, and he's going to be the keynote speaker this weekend at their conference. And by the way, it's not just self-hating Jews. It's leftists of all kinds. Baker, who served under George H.W. Bush, and of course he served under Reagan, is now advising Governor Jeb Bush on foreign policy in his presidential effort at Jeb Bush's invitation. And Baker's hostile to Israel, and he's controversial among Jewish voters. As the Al Jaminer notes, that's a website, Baker is, of course, infamous for reportedly saying in a private conversation while George H.W. Bush is Secretary of State, F the Jews, they didn't vote for us anyway. And you know where that comes from? The late mayor of New York, Ed Koch, said that James Baker said that to him. Excuse me. That comes from Jack Kemp. Jack Kemp told Ed Koch that James Baker said it to him, to Jack Kemp. And they write that this antipathy towards Israel is well documented. Baker wanted the U.S. to punish Israel for destroying Iraq's Ozark nuclear reactor. He hated Netanyahu as early as 1990, barring him from entering the State Department's building. And last but not least, Baker co-wrote the Iraq Study Group's 2006 paper that recommended, among other things, that the United States tilt its foreign policy away from Israel and towards Syria and Iran, advice that Obama seems to have taken to heart. And Baker's law firm, big firm in Houston, has done a lot of oil business with the Arab states. This is the guy, the leading advisor to Jeb Bush on foreign policy, who Jeb Bush asked to be his leading advisor, and now he's the keynote speaker to this left-wing hate group, if you will, J Street. And the J Street conference will also feature Palestinian chief negotiator Saeb Erekat, a firebrand who propagated the lie that Israel committed a massacre during counter-terror operations in Jenin in 2002. The Obama administration is sending White House Chief of Staff Dennis McConough to headline the conference. J Street actively opposed Netanyahu, and the conference is expected to provide an opportunity for his American critics to vent. James Baker told Larry King earlier this week on the is there a Larry King show? He told, anyway, he's on a no-name network. So Baker told Larry King that he's on Team Jeb. He said, frankly, I've talked to Governor Bush a little bit about foreign policy. He talked to me about listing me as one of his advisors. I said I'd be honored to be listed. So here Jeb Bush waxing on and on. We need to send our message out to minorities and get it out there. And who does he bring in on foreign policy? The detestable and diabolical James Baker. And Baker also criticized the Republican senators who had signed a letter, the open letter, to the Iranian leaders, warning them that any nuclear deal would have to be ratified by the U.S. He said, I'm a creature of the executive branch, Baker. Well, how about being a creature of the Constitution, pal? And this J Street has been part of this massive boycott trying to cut off Israel economically. It's been active on college campuses. It's a real Israel hate group. So why would Jeb Bush reach out to James Baker III, another Israel hater, and bring him into his campaign to be an advisor? Well, Jeb Bush won't come on this program, so I can't ask him. Maybe one of his friends or acolytes on Fox will ask him. I'll be right back.
Mark Levin.